from good to great. I'm Keith O'Malley of Law Society Career Support Service. Hi. The purpose of this video is to facilitate solicitors who can't attend the actual workshop on Monday, the 4th of March 2019. We hope you find this recording to be of benefit. We covered the very same material in this that we're covering within the workshop. One thing I would say though is there are a range of other videos about interview performance and about how to do well in interview performance already on the Law Society Career Support website, and a lot of the content in those won't be covered in this workshop, so we would suggest you look at those. They cover a wider range of matters than we're going to cover this evening. They cover telephone interviews, negotiating at interviews, doing presentations at interviews, and answers to interview questions. So we won't be covering those, so I would suggest that you look at those videos on the Law Society website within the member section of the website. What we're going to cover this evening are three matters. We're going to look at preparation, we're going to look at how to impress on the day when you go for interview, and we're going to finish up by looking at what people do in order to really slam dunk an interview, to establish themselves as the clear best person on the day. So we're going to start with preparation, and I suggest we look at preparation in four different aspects of preparation. I suggest we look at self-appraisal, we look at researching the job, we look at preparing answers to questions that you're very likely going to be asked, and we look at rehearsing. Rehearsing really is mock interviewing. So in terms of self-appraisal, it's really important that you are familiar and on top of your achievements that you've had in the past, particularly work-related achievements. And you do that by doing an achievement list. We use this sheet here. We always propose that people fill out a sheet like this. So we're looking at you listing achievements, when and where you just specify when it happened, and also you tease out them benefits that accrued out of these achievements. Ideally, you should have 4 or 5, maybe even 6 pages of achievements like this, going back from the present day right back to when you started working, and even in college. So we strongly urge that you do an achievement list before, as part of your preparation for interview, before you attend interview. You're not going to do yourself justice if you don't do an achievement list. You also need to be very clear about what your strengths are, and in particular strengths that are relevant to the job that you're going for. So you need to know what they are, and you need to be able to talk about them. It's very important that you're clear about your aspirations, and particularly your relatively short-term aspirations, how this job might fit into what you want to achieve. It seems a bit daft, but we would encourage you to be very clear about your career history. So if you go for interview, what you don't want to be doing is stumbling over dates or people you work with or anything else like that. So list places you worked, dates you were there, colleagues you had, people, the boss you reported to, and just make sure that you're familiar with names. There's nothing worse than telling a story and then going back and having to say, oh, by the way, that wasn't 2015, that was actually 2013. So be as familiar as you can with your career, about your career history. Researching the job is really important. So this is the second part of preparation that we're going to cover. What you need to do is be very clear about the job and about the requirements for the job. So you tend to get that from the job description, and you should look for a job description from your employer. Another good way of doing this is if you can talk to people who are in the company, in the firm, and they may give you some additional information, and you might get insights into things that are not covered within the job description. It's really important that you look at and you consider development potential. Whenever an employer is looking to hire somebody, they want somebody to do an immediate job, a job that needs to be done. But so often, particularly if they're looking for at a professional appointment of a solicitor, they're all the time looking at how the person might develop over time. Is this person capable of becoming a partner? So what you need to be able to do to perform well in an interview is to be able to talk about how the job might be developed over time. So you need to go in an interview and reassure the person that or people that are interviewing you that you can do the job that they're looking for. But also it really helps if you can talk about how you would see the job possibly being developed over time, or particular interests that you have that align to that. Cultural fit and recruiting priorities can be very, very important. Quite often, a particular firm or a particular organisation has a kind of person that they're most comfortable hiring. If you know what that is, you can, in as far as possible, you can shoehorn yourself into that kind of presenting yourself as that kind of person at an interview. But so if there is a particular type that they tend to hire, and you feel you can present yourself as that kind of a person, that's a smart interview tactic, and it's done by doing your preparation beforehand and identifying the kind of person that they like to hire and the kind of ethos that exists within the organisation or the firm. It's really important that you get good information about the interview. You're absolutely entitled to phone beforehand and inquire who you're going to meet, what issues the interviewers are going to be concerned about, what kind of an interview is it? Is it going to be a competency interview? Is it going to be some other kind of an interview? And so ask questions about this, particularly in terms of who you're going to meet, and then do some research on the people that you're going to meet. Look up them on LinkedIn and try and get as much as you can to find out about what interests them, where their priorities lay. So, next thing we're going to look at is preparing answers. We do not propose that you write out answers and learn them off. That's not a good idea. But it is quite simply a fact that at interviews, a lot of the questions are regularly come up. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What achievements are you particularly proud of? What do you feel you can bring to this job? All of these kind of questions. I did mention earlier that there are there is a collection of videos about interviews on the Law Society website, and there is one that deals with a lot of these common questions that come up, like strengths and weaknesses, and that you can look at those. But it's really important that you don't find yourself stumped by a pretty, regularly occurring question. And what we would suggest you do is you think about the question, maybe jot down 2 or 3 bullet points how you might, just to sort out your thinking in terms of how you might answer that. And, don't do any more than that. Don't try and memorize or come up with an absolutely, absolute way of always answering a question, because questions are always asked slightly different, and interviewers have different priorities or different concerns. So your answer is always going to change and be shaped by the people you meet, by the environment you're in. Next thing we would suggest is rehearsing, and really that comes down to doing mock interviews. After the achievement list, nothing is more important than doing a mock interview, and it is absolutely crazy in our view that people attend interviews without doing a mock interview. If you're asked to be best man at your friend's wedding, quite often people go off and join Toastmasters for 6 months to make sure sure that they do well at a speech in front of a bunch of family and friends. But to go in for interview without preparing, it's just utterly crazy. So what we would suggest you do is you do mock interviews, and these are not difficult to do. They're probably best done at home with just one other person. So you need a quiet space. A kitchen tends to work well. You need a table, 2 chairs, and you quite often what you'll do is you'll give the other person a list of questions. You'll say to them you want to be interviewed in a formal way, so you'll go outside the door, they'll bring you in, they'll explain to you that you're about to be interviewed, about how it's going to proceed. They will have a list of questions, and they'll bring you through it. What happens in a mock interview quite often, somebody asks you, whoever is doing the interview asks you some question like, well, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And you look across the table and you say, that's my wife, that's my husband on the other side. This is kind of ridiculous. But once you get into 1 or 2 questions, you answer them, you'll get in your competitive gene will kick in, and you'll go at it and stay within it. If you find yourself stumbling halfway through the interview or whatever, don't give up and say, can we start again, or anything else like that. Stick with it, see it through. You can always do a second one, but mock interviews really help. One way, you don't want to be too familiar with the questions you're asked, so it's a good idea to suggest to the interviewer that they, if you've given them a list of questions, that they maybe mix them up a little bit or add a few in themselves, so that you're not getting questions in exactly the way you expect it, in the same way that you gave them to the person who's now interviewing you. We're now going to move on and look at impressing an interviewer. And again, we're going to look at 4 aspects to this. We're going to start by looking at getting started, about getting to the premises, and about how you handle yourself going into your interview. We're going to look at discussing matters at interview. We're going to look at answering questions and a smart way to answer questions, and we're going to look at finishing strong. So this area is obviously the real pivotal part of the video, because this is what so much of the video is about. This is where things are won or lost. The day you arrive at interview to be seen. Excuse me. So, what we suggest is that you arrive early. If there's a bathroom, if you want to go to the bathroom, if you have left yourself an extra 4 or 5 minutes, you can ask to go to the bathroom. A lot of people suggest that's a good idea, because it allows you to freshen up, but also it gives you an opportunity to see a little bit more of the premises than you would have otherwise seen. Smile and compliment, particularly if you're in a reception area. Maybe there's a picture on the wall that's nice, or whatever. Say something pleasant to the receptionist, and also then somebody's going to come and from the interview room and bring you to the interview room, and it's a good idea if you say something pleasant along the way, you chat along the way. So normally the HR manager or HR person will be bring you on that journey into the room. Excuse me. What should you bring with you? As little as possible. Ladies, there's if you can, don't bring too much in the way of bags or anything else like that. If you do have stuff, leave it at reception. Don't bring it into the interview with you. Really, you need nothing except an envelope with 2 or 3 copies of your CV, just in case somebody doesn't have one at interview, and you can give them one. So you come prepared with a few copies of your CV, but you don't put your CV out in front of you, and you don't refer to a CV or to notes, and you don't take notes at interview. You should identify who the decision maker is, because you want to give that person a little bit more time, a little bit more attention. The decision maker almost always is the person who the job will report to. So your boss, the person who's going to be your boss. Because what happens at interview is other people are there and present, and they have an input into the decision, but the real decision tends to be left to the person who is going to have to manage the person. In terms of discussing matters, it's really important that you show lots of enthusiasm and that you express ambition. You're a person who wants to get on. You have big aspirations about how you want to succeed in law and what you want to do. Never be negative. And there's no ifs, buts, or anything else about that. You just quite simply are never negative. And if sometimes, an employer might say, oh, I believe such and such is a hard man to work for, or something else like that. You say, well, that wasn't my experience. Never, never be negative. It always reflects badly on you. There's two interesting kind of terms when it comes to interviews. There's what's called the 2-minute rule and the 50-50 rule. The 2-minute rule is that any question that you're asked, you should aim to answer it within 2 minutes. And if you're going to go on much longer, you need to really, it's a good idea to break it and say, after you've spoken for about 2 minutes or coming up to 2 minutes, say, I can give you more detail about such and such a matter. Do you want that? So you're not going on a 5 or 10 minute monologue. It just doesn't work. The 50-50 rule is that at an interview, at a physical interview where you're sitting in front of an employer, 50% of the conversation should be really coming from one side of the table and 50% from you. So the interviewers talk 50% of the time, and you talk 50% of the time. And what's a really good idea to do, in as far as you can, and this is something we're going to come back to, is try and steer as much discussion around to matters that interest the interviewers. So, really, if you're asked questions, that first question, talk us through your background, don't start spending lots of time talking about your past and what you did in previous jobs. Employers are interested in the present, employers are interested in the future in terms of what you can do for them. They will ask you questions about the past. They seem to be quite obsessed sometimes with the past, but actually what interests them is the present, and even more important, the future. And as I said, we'll return to that matter in due course. Answering questions. It's really important when you are asked questions that you let the person finish. How do you know they finished? Wait. It may take 2-3 seconds, but you'll then, they won't say any more. At that stage, and only at that stage, acknowledge. And how you do that is you nod, or you say, oh, okay, or yes, or something else like that to acknowledge that you've listened to their question and you're now ready to answer it. And then, and only then, should you start thinking about what you want to say. Don't start composing your answer while the person is still halfway through answering the question. Wait till they finish, make sure they're finished, acknowledge that they're finished, and then compose your answer. How does that come across? How is that viewed on the other side of the table? They very quickly see what you're at, and they say, "This is a smart person." They provide considered answers. Before he or she says anything, he or she thinks about what they're going to say. And so smart person. much better thing to do, because you're much more likely to answer questions not make mistakes about what the person wants to know about, and also is the added benefit that you come across as a smarter, more considered person. If you're uncertain about what they're asking, ask clarifying questions. So it's utterly fine to say, well, or do you want me to talk through that in terms of client relationships, or do you want me to talk about that in terms of business development, whatever your uncertainty is. If you don't know, it is said, you've got two options. One is you can admit you don't know. The other is you can go on and prove it. I wouldn't be quite so quick to advise you to admit you don't know something. Before you say that you don't know you don't have the answer that they're looking for, ask some questions, some clarifying questions. Ask them what exactly they're looking for. Ask questions around the subject, and quite often you'll find that in fact you do have the answer. It's just the way they answered the question, they came at it a slightly different way, or it wasn't the kind of question you were expected to be asked, but actually you're familiar with what they're talking about, and you can respond. Finishing strong. It's really important to start strong and to finish strong. And how you finish strong is you'll be asked at the end of towards the end of the interview, okay, we've gone through all of our questions. Have you any questions that you want to ask? And you say yes. But before I do, can I just say, I really enjoyed meeting you today. I've enjoyed meeting you, Brian. I've enjoyed meeting you, Francis. And I've enjoyed meeting you, Patricia. And having met you and talked through the job, I have to say I'm really interested and would like to be considered further. Don't leave without saying that you're interested in the job. Make sure that they fully understand that you're interested in the job. And nice to finish it that kind of way. And if you really want to do well, then say, and I believe I have something special to offer. And what you do then is you hit them with what you feel is most important and of greatest concern for them. So if you feel that innovation is really important, you say, and I believe I have a lot to offer at this role, particularly in the area of innovation, the area to be creative and in approaches. Use names as you're departing, so shake hands with people and say to each of them, nice to meet you, Frank, nice to meet you, Francis, nice to meet you, Patricia. How do you do that? You do that with your preparation the day beforehand. You identify the people who you're going to be interviewed. You check them out on LinkedIn and other social media areas like that, and ideally get a picture of them. So you know what Frank looks like, you know what Francis looks like, and you know what Patricia looks like. So you're not going to have any problem remembering their names when you meet them, because when you've been through a half an hour interview and there's lots of different questions, if you haven't readied yourself, you won't be. It's very likely you won't be able to remember the names. Good idea as well is to send a thank you email to the decision maker when you leave when you get finished. So a lot of us can do this on our telephone. So as soon as you leave, you send a little email. This comes down to preparation. You know who the decision maker is going in for interview, and you have you've identified their email address. So you send them a quick email saying, really nice, appreciate the time you gave me today. I'm very interested in the job. So, how can you slam dunk an interview? How can you go in and perform so well at an interview, there's no question but you're going to be offered the job? There's three areas I'm going to talk through. The first is what I call a silver bullet, is to identify and utilize silver bullet. What is a silver bullet? A silver bullet is something that is especially important for the employer, normally for the decision maker. So quite often the decision maker will have something that they're utterly really concerned about. You know, whoever I get, I don't want them to leave within 12 months like the last two people have done. If you can identify what is really important to the decision maker, you're in a very strong position, because of course that's what you appeal to. So, you know, when an interview, well, what are your particular strengths? Well, I am a stayer. You know, if I take on a job or a commitment or something else like that, I stick out and stick it in the long term. Look how long I spent in the last job and the job before that. So if you can find out what's important to the decision maker, it can make a huge difference in terms of how you can market yourself, sell yourself to that person. And you might think this is, you know, is not a common thing, but so often a decision maker will have some huge big priority. Sometimes it'll be stated, it'll be disclosed, you know, in the job description. It's really important that the person can do this or whatever. But other times it's tacit, you know, it's not talked about, it's certainly not recorded in a job description or anything else like that. How do you find out about silver bullets like that? Two ways. One, you do it beforehand, before the interview, and you do that by talking to people who know the person, who know the company, know the firm, and know the kind of ethos that exists and the kind of concerns that maybe this particular person has. And the other way you can do it is as well, and you should be, you know, combining, doing both all the time, is an interview. Sometimes an interview, you'll notice that a person is particularly alert, their eyes suddenly light up, you know, when something is mentioned, innovation is mentioned, and suddenly, you know, you can see them, you know, becoming a good deal more alert. Whatever, you see that, you recognize that, you just store it away, and you say, you know, before the interview is out, I'm going to, you know, take advantage of that and market myself on that thing. The second area, if you really want to slam dunk somebody at interview, is to move the focus as much as you can away from the past and the stuff from the thing to the job, and how the job, how you would do the job, and how you would like to develop the job and make it into something more. This is really important. Interviewers have this thing, they ask questions about the past. You know, particularly competency-based interviews are obsessed with the past. Tell us about, you know, what you did in the past that demonstrates that you've got this particular ability. It's really important, though, in as far as you can, that you get talking about how you would do the job, and also how you would develop the job and make it into something more. Sometimes it's a good idea, depending on the job and your level of seniority, you might talk about challenges that exist in the job and ways that you would see around those challenges. And you do this, there's a knack to doing this. When you're asked questions, a good idea is to finish them by saying, and I think this is particularly relevant to this job because. So, you know, you're being asked about your strengths and whatever, and you say, well, I think I'm a natural leader, and you know, I've always done well in situations where leadership was required, and you give them an example, and you say, I think this is particularly important in this job because it seems to me so often in this job somebody's going to have to step up to the plate and take charge of situations, and I think I've got that capability. So what you're trying to do is talk about the job, and in an ideal situation, the people on the other side of the table will respond, and they'll say, well, that's important, but also something else is important. And suddenly you've got this discussion going across the table about what the job is about. You're no longer talking about you, you're talking about the job. And even better, you're talking about maybe challenges that exist in the job at the moment, and they're talking about ways that you might get around them. You know, that's a wonderful situation. The interview has shifted from, you know, are you the kind of person that we're right to here? How would you deal with this matter? How would you deal with that matter? So the more that you can shift discussion and conversation from the past and from things that are personal to you to the job, it really makes a huge difference. And you do it primarily by finishing up answers to questions by saying, and I think this is relevant to the job because of the following reasons. The last point I'm going to cover is very closely aligned to that and its depth of knowledge. Preparation, of course, is a key in this. If you can really find out a lot about the job and you can get to understand the job and the not just how the job reads on paper, but what it's like to do it, and the kind of nuances of the job and the little difficulties that exist and things that are coming down the track that are going to challenge the job. The more you can find out about the job and you can position yourself ready to talk about the job in very, very intimate and in-depth way, that's going to impress the employer. And it also opens up, an opportunity, if you can establish a discussion across the table about how the job might be done, then you're going to prepare yourself. You're going to do well if you've got very, very good intimate knowledge about the job. Because you see, at interview, the ideal thing all the time, what you're ultimately trying to do is get the employer to say, this is the kind of person we need. This person will be able to hit the ground running and do this job, and we're not going to have to worry about it anymore. And he or she also seems to have some great ideas about how it can be further developed. That's a bonus. But what they want is somebody who gets it, who understands the job just like they understand the job, and who they can rely on to come in, take it on board, and not require lots of supervision and direction. What's the best way to prepare for that? The best way is if you can talk to somebody at a senior enough level and who understands the job, understands the organization, but particularly the job, and can tell you, these are critical matters, these are less important matters, and can give you an appreciation of the priorities of the job. That if you can get that kind of a in-depth and full understanding of the job, you're in a very, very good situation. That's the end of this video. What we've gone through here is everything that was covered in the workshop. I hope you'll be looking at the video next week on competency interviews. It'll be similar to this one, and if you have any comments or you have any queries, give me a call anytime. I'm Keith O'Malley in Career Support in the Law Society.